The plasma streams tore through Velthara's crimson atmosphere like silver threads through silk, each one carrying death at 17,000 kilometers per hour. High Commander Nixtel watched from the orbital command station as the impossible happened below human ships, sleek as obsidian daggers, diving through atmospheric layers that should have incinerated any vessel not built by Veltharan hands. Impossible, breathed Sub-Commander Kefmer, his 4 eyes wide with disbelief. Nothing survives our atmospheric sheath. The corrosive sulfur compounds alone would strip hull plating in seconds. But there they were, 12 ships in perfect formation, their hulls shimmering with some unknown energy field as they descended through the killing atmosphere toward the surface cities below. The Blade-class vessels moved with predatory grace, their swept-wing configurations cutting through the dense, poisonous air as if it were mere vacuum. Nixtel's claws clicked against the command console as he activated the planetary defense grid. All batteries, target the human vessels, maximum yield. The orbital platforms erupted in cascades of emerald fire, sending torrents of energy down toward the descending ships. The humans didn't even attempt evasive maneuvers. They simply absorbed it. Their hull shielding flared brilliant white as the defensive fire struck, then returned to its normal metallic sheen. "Sir," Kefmer's voice carried a tremor the High Commander had never heard before. "Energy absorption readings are... They're converting our weapons fire into propulsion energy." The lead human ship's communications array crackled to life. The voice that emerged was calm, almost conversational, speaking perfect Veltharan with only the slightest accent. "Veltharan Defense Command. This is Captain Kyrian Thane of the Terran Expeditionary Force. We're coming down whether you like it or not. I suggest you evacuate your civilian population centers." Nixtel's jaw clenched. The audacity of these soft-skinned mammals was beyond comprehension. "Human, your primitive vessels cannot survive atmospheric entry. Our world's very breath is death to outsiders." A sound emerged from the something the commander had never heard before but instinctively recognized as deeply unsettling. "Human laughter, your atmosphere?" Captain Thane's voice carried dark amusement. "We've been studying it for 3 months. Sulfuric acid clouds, methane storms, pressure differentials that would crush most ships like empty cans. It's almost cute compared to some of the places we've been." The first Blade-class ship broke through the lower atmospheric layer, its hull now glowing cherry red but intact. Behind it, the other 11 followed in perfect formation. As they descended toward the primary industrial complex, Nixtel could see their true design philosophy at work. These weren't ships built for comfort or appearance, they were weapons, pure and simple. Every curve, every angle, every surface was optimized for one purpose: penetrating defenses that others considered impenetrable. "Sir," Kefmer whispered, "long-range sensors are detecting something else. The humans. They're not just here for a demonstration." Nixtel pulled up the tactical display and felt his dual heart skip a beat. Beyond Velthara's outer moon, more contacts were appearing. Not 12 ships, not even dozens. Hundreds of vessels were decloaking, ranging from sleek destroyers to massive carrier dreadnoughts that dwarfed anything in the Veltharan fleet. The crackled again. "Commander Nixtel," Captain Thane's voice had lost its conversational tone. 3 hours ago, your government declared war on the Terran Federation and bombed our colony on Kepler 442b. You killed 40,000 civilians, including children who had never seen their homeworld. The first Blade-class ship touched down in the industrial district with impossible gentleness, its landing thrusters barely scorching the ferrocrete beneath. Immediately, armored figures began disembarking humans in power armor that gleamed like liquid mercury. "We're here to discuss terms," Thane continued. "Your atmosphere was supposed to be your shield. Your people told you nothing could reach your surface alive. They were wrong." As if to emphasize the point, the remaining 11 ships settled onto landing pads across the capital city. their hulls still radiating heat, but their crews already beginning deployment procedures. Nixtel stared at the tactical display showing the expanding human fleet in orbit. His species had ruled this sector for 3 centuries, had conquered a dozen worlds through the simple expedient of superior atmospheric warfare technology. No enemy had ever reached Velthera's surface until today. Captain Kirian Thane stepped out of the razor wind and immediately felt the familiar burn of hostile atmosphere against his environmental suit's outer layer. The suit's biomimetic coating adapted instantly, its surface reshaping to better deflect the corrosive compounds that made Veltheran air lethal to most carbon-based life. Atmospheric composition confirmed, reported Lieutenant Zara Hendricks, her voice crisp through the CUM system. 0.73% hydrogen sulfide, 12% methane, trace amounts of phosphine. Everything's trying to kill us, sir. Standard Tuesday then, Thane replied, surveying the alien cityscape. The Veltheran architecture was impressive, soaring spires of what looked like crystallized metal, connected by bridges that seemed to float unsupported through the toxic air. Remember, we're not here to sightsee. Deploy the atmospheric processors and establish a perimeter. The Veltherans had stopped shooting from orbit, which meant they were either out of ammunition or more likely beginning to understand the scope of what they were facing. Thane's tactical display showed the local defense forces assembling 3 kilometers to the north, but they seemed hesitant to approach. Smart of them. Sir, came the voice of Sergeant Mika Volkov from the Nightshard's landing site across the city. We've got movement. Looks like a delegation approaching under a white flag. Well, whitish. Their version seems to be more of a pulsing purple. Thane checked his chronometer. Faster than expected. Most species took at least 6 hours to work up the courage for direct contact after a demonstration like this. The Veltherans were either braver or more desperate than average. All teams maintain defensive positions but hold fire unless fired upon. This is a diplomatic mission, people. We're here to send a message, not commit genocide. The delegation consisted of 5 Veltherans in what appeared to be ceremonial armor, though Thane's suit sensors detected defensive capabilities that would make human battle armor jealous. The lead figure was tall, even by Veltheran standards, with the distinctive 4-eyed facial structure and elongated limbs that marked him as a member of the ruling caste. I am High Commander Nixtel, the alien said, his translator rendering his words in accented but clear English. I speak for the Veltheran hegemony in this sector. Captain Kirian Thane, Terran Expeditionary Force. Thane didn't extend his hand-human gestures, often translated poorly, and he had no desire to accidentally offer insult or challenge. I assume you've had time to consider our position. Nixtela's head tilted in what Thane's cultural briefings identified as confusion mixed with wariness. Your ships. How do they survive our atmosphere? Our scientists assured us that nothing not born to these conditions could endure the corrosive effects. Your scientists were thinking too small. Thane replied, Earth's atmosphere may be oxygen-rich and pleasant, but we've spent the last 2 centuries learning to live in places that make your world look like a vacation resort. We've got colonies on worlds where the rain is sulfuric acid, where the air pressure would crush your bones, where the native microorganisms actively try to dissolve anything they touch. He gestured toward the Razorwind, its hull still gleaming despite its passage through the killer atmosphere. The Blade-class ships weren't designed for your world specifically. They were designed for any world that thinks atmospheric hazards provide adequate defense. You're saying you've done this before, Nixtel said, and there was something in his tone that suggested he already knew the answer. 17 times in the past 5 years, Thane confirmed. Usually against species who thought their environmental advantages made them untouchable. Gas giants with crushing pressure, worlds shrouded in electromagnetic storms, planets where the very ground is radioactive. We've learned that there's no such thing as an impenetrable natural defense. The High Commander's 4 eyes all focused on Thane with unsettling intensity. What do you want? Justice, Thane said simply. Your government bombed one of our colonies. 40,000 civilians died. Women, children, elderly people who had nothing to do with military operations, who were just trying to build new lives on a distant world. The colony was established in violation of established territorial boundaries. Nixtel protested, but his voice lacked conviction. The colony was on a world with no indigenous life, in a system your people had never even visited, Thane countered. Your government decided that human expansion threatened Veltharan interests, so you struck first and struck hard. Now we're here to collect. Above them, the alien sky flickered as more human ships dropped out of FTL, their massive forms visible, even through the dense atmosphere. Thane didn't need to look up to know what Nixtel was seeing. The entire Third Fleet, 300 ships strong, taking position in Veltharan space. This is madness, Nixtel whispered. A single fleet cannot conquer an entire sector. We're not here to conquer, Thane said. We're here to make sure this never happens again. Admiral Cassie Drakemore stood on the bridge of the fleet carrier Sovereignty's Edge, watching the tactical hologram with the patience of someone who had orchestrated this type of operation too many times before. The Veltharan home fleet was impressive, nearly 800 vessels, arranged in classical defensive formations around their primary worlds. They had no idea what they were facing. Admiral, the Veltharans are requesting the communication channel, reported Commander Jin Watanabe. From the comm station. It's coming from their flagship, the... My translator's having trouble with this one. Crimson Dominion of the Eternal Sky. Typical, muttered Flight Marshal Elena Vasquez from her position at the fighter control console. Nothing says, we're compensating for something, like a ship name that takes 30 seconds to say. Drakemore allowed herself a slight smile. Put them through, Commander. The main display shimmered and resolved into the image of what was clearly a Veltharan fleet. Commander. The alien's ornate uniform was crusted with symbols that probably indicated rank, combat honors, and social standing. His 4 eyes regarded the human officers with barely concealed hostility. I am Fleet Admiral Korthvanis of the Veltharan Deep. Fleet, the alien announced. You will explain your presence in our sovereign space immediately. Admiral Cassie Drakemore, 3rd Fleet, Terran Expeditionary Force, she replied with professional courtesy. We're here in response to your government's unprovoked attack on our colony at Kepler 442b. I'm sure you're familiar with the incident. Korthvanis' expression shifted slightly. That was a legitimate military action against an illegal settlement in disputed territory. Disputed by whom? Drakemore asked. Your government had no presence in that system, no territorial claims, no established interests. You attacked because you were afraid of human expansion, not because we violated any treaty. The Veltharan Admiral's jaw clenched, a gesture that translated across species lines. What are your demands? Drakemore had been waiting for this question. First, immediate reparations for the families of those killed in your attack. Second, formal acknowledgement that the attack was unprovoked and in violation of interstellar law. Third, guaranteed safe passage for human vessels through this sector. Impossible, Korthvanis snapped. The Veltharan hegemony does not bow to the demands of primitives. Primitives? Commander Watanabe looked up from his station with raised eyebrows. Admiral, should I show them the fleet deployment pattern? I think that would be educational. Drakemore agreed. The tactical display expanded to show the full scope of the 3rd Fleet's positioning. The Veltharans had been so focused on the ships they could see that they'd missed the ones they couldn't. Stealth destroyers materialized from behind asteroid fields, carrier groups decloaked from the shadow of gas giant moons, and most impressively, a full battle squadron rose from the planetary rings where they'd been hiding among the ice. Fragments. Korthvani stared at the display for a long moment, his 4 eyes tracking from ship to ship as he began to understand the true mathematics of the situation. The Veltharan fleet outnumbered the humans 3-1, but they were concentrated in predictable defensive positions, while the humans had achieved perfect tactical placement. "How long have you been here?" he asked quietly. 6 weeks, Drakemore replied. "We've been studying your fleet movements, your communication patterns, your tactical doctrines. We know which of your ships have engine problems, which captains are considered competent, and which supply lines keep your fleet operational." Flight Marshal Vasquez leaned forward. "We also know about the ammunition shortage in your outer defense ring, the maintenance backlog in your heavy cruiser squadron, and the fact that your fleet admiral has been quietly moving his personal assets off-world for the past month." Korthvani's expression went through several changes before settling on resignation. "You've been watching us." "We've been learning about you," Drakemore corrected. "It's what we do." Every species thinks they have some unbeatable advantage: atmospheric defenses, numerical superiority, technological edges. But advantages only work if your enemy doesn't know about them. The tactical display shifted again, showing detailed schematics of Veltharan ship designs alongside their human counterparts. The differences were illuminating. Veltharan vessels were built for show as much as function, with elaborate superstructures and ornamental elements that added mass without improving capability. Human ships, by contrast, were optimized for a single purpose: war. Every ton of mass, every cubic meter of space, every joule of energy was dedicated to the business of combat. They weren't prettier than Veltharan ships, but they were significantly more deadly. "Your fleet is impressive," Drakemore continued, "but it's designed for fighting other Veltharan fleets, using Veltharan tactics. We don't fight like you do. We don't think like you do. And we've had centuries to perfect the art of asymmetric warfare." Korthvani was studying the tactical display with the intensity of someone beginning to understand just how badly he'd been outmaneuvered. "What happens now?" "That depends on you," Drakemore replied. "Your ground forces are already negotiating with our diplomatic team on the surface. Your orbital defenses have been neutralized. Your fleet is surrounded and outgunned. You can either accept our terms gracefully, or we can demonstrate why nobody attacks human civilians without consequences." The Veltharan admiral looked at his own tactical officers, saw the same realization dawning on their faces. They'd walked into a trap that had been 6 weeks in the making. "I need to consult with my government," he said finally. "You have 6 hours," Drakemore replied. Then cut the transmission. In the depths of the Veltharan government complex, Chancellor Vex Thara paced before the assembled High Council with the fury of someone watching centuries of careful planning collapse in real time. The holographic display showed the tactical situation in painful detail: human ships positioned with surgical precision throughout Veltharan space, their own fleet effectively neutralized without a shot being fired. "Explain to me," she hissed at Defense Minister Kolthek, "how a single human fleet has managed to completely outmaneuver our entire defensive network." Kolthek's 4 eyes avoided direct contact with the Chancellor's gaze. "The humans appear to have been studying us for far longer than we realized. Our intelligence networks completely failed to detect their reconnaissance operations." "Because you told us they were primitives," Interior Minister Yothmers interjected. "You said their technology was centuries behind ours, that their ships were crude and inefficient." "Their ships are crude," Kolthek protested weakly. "Compared to our engineering standards, their ships are functional," Chancellor Vexthara cut him off. "While we were building monuments to our own egos, they were building weapons. While we were crafting beautiful vessels that would look impressive in parades, they were optimizing every system for combat effectiveness." The tactical display updated to show more detail about the human fleet composition. The information was coming from their own trapped ships, forced to provide detailed scans under threat of immediate destruction. What they revealed was sobering human. Vessels that looked primitive on the outside, but housed technology that operated on principles Veltharan science barely understood. "Chancellor," came a new voice from the communication station. "We're receiving a direct transmission from the human surface commander. He's requesting a face-to-face meeting." Vexthara's claws extended involuntarily. No alien species had made such a demand in 3 centuries. The very idea of foreign warriors walking the sacred halls of the government complex was an insult beyond imagination. "Tell him, ma'am," the communications officer interrupted, something he would never normally dare. "He's not requesting permission. He's informing us that he'll be here in 1 hour, with or without an escort." The Chancellor stared at the tactical display, at the human ships positioned throughout her star system, at the ground forces that had somehow survived passage through an atmosphere that should have killed them all. The mathematics were inescapable. They had no leverage left. "Fine," she said through gritted teeth. "Prepare the formal reception chamber. If these humans want to dictate terms like conquerors, we'll at least force them to do it properly." "Exactly." 1 hour later, Captain Kyrian Thane walked through the main entrance of the Veltharan government complex, wearing full combat armor and carrying a sidearm that his escorts, weapons scanners couldn't even properly identify. Behind him came Lieutenant Hendricks and Sergeant Volkov, their environmental suits gleaming with the same impossible technology that had allowed their ships to survive. Atmospheric entry. The formal reception chamber was designed to intimidate soaring. Ceilings, carved pillars depicting Veltharan military victories. Holographic displays showing the extent of their territorial holdings. Thane glanced around with what appeared to be mild professional interest, as if evaluating the defensive positions and strategic vulnerabilities. "Chancellor Vexthara," he said, offering a slight nod that managed to be respectful without being deferential. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." "You didn't give us much choice," she replied coldly. "No," Thane agreed simply. "We didn't. Your government made certain choices when you decided to bomb our colony. Now we're here to discuss the consequences of those choices." Defense Minister Kolthek stepped forward, his ceremonial armor clanking with every movement. The colony was established in violation of clearly established territorial boundaries. The Terran Federation was expanding aggressively into sectors claimed by the Veltharan hegemony. "Claimed how?" Lieutenant Hendricks asked, consulting a datapad. "We've reviewed your territorial filings with the Galactic Commerce Authority. You have no formal claims in the Kepler 442 system. No survey expeditions, no resource extraction operations, no permanent installations. Our sphere of influence," Kolthek began, "is not a legal concept under interstellar law," Thane interrupted. "You attacked our colony because you were afraid of human expansion, not because we violated any treaty or agreement. 40,000 civilians died because your government decided to make a preemptive strike." Chancellor Vexthara studied the human captain with growing unease. She had expected either brutal conquerors or naive diplomats. Instead, she was facing someone who combined military competence with legal precision and the backing to enforce. "Both. What do you want?" she asked. Thane activated his own datapad, projecting a holographic document into the center of the chamber. Reparations for the families of those killed. Formal acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Guaranteed safe passage for human vessels through this sector. And one additional term. The additional term materialized in the hologram, and Chancellor Vexthara felt her dual hearts skip a beat. "You want us to provide safe harbor for human refugee fleets?" "The galaxy is a dangerous place," Thane said mildly. "Sometimes human colonies have to evacuate quickly. Sometimes our ships need emergency repairs or resupply. We want assurance that Veltharan space will be available when we need it. You're asking us to become a client state," Interior Minister Yothmers protested. "We're asking you to become responsible." "Neighbors," Sergeant Volkov corrected. "The kind who don't bomb civilian colonies without provocation." Chancellor Vexthara looked around the chamber at her advisors, seeing the same realization dawning on all their faces. The humans weren't here to conquer or destroy. They were here to establish a new balance of power. One where attacking human civilians carried swift and certain consequences. "And if we refuse?" she asked. Thane's expression didn't change, but somehow the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "Then we demonstrate why that would be unwise." Admiral Drakemore materialized in the government complex's holographic conference chamber, her image transmitted from the bridge of the Sovereignty's edge. The Veltherans had been stalling for 3 hours, trying to find some leverage, some angle that would allow them to negotiate as equals. They were about to learn why that wouldn't be possible. "Chancellor Vexthara," Drakemore began without preamble, "I understand you need a demonstration of what rejection of our terms would entail. Very well." The chamber's display systems activated without permission from Veltheran operators, hijacked by human electronic warfare specialists who had been quietly infiltrating their networks for weeks. What appeared was a real-time tactical overview of the entire Veltheran star system, showing every ship, every installation, every defensive platform. "Your primary orbital defense network," Drakemore continued, highlighting a series of massive weapons platforms surrounding the planet, consists of 47 heavy plasma batteries, each one capable of destroying a dreadnought-class vessel in a sustained engagement. The platforms began exploding, not from weapons fire from within. Small detonations rippled through critical systems, as human infiltration programs activated dormant viruses that had been planted during routine maintenance cycles. One by one, the pride of Veltheran defensive engineering went dark. "Your deep space sensor network, which you use to monitor approaching fleets and coordinate defensive responses." More lights began winking out on the display, this time representing sensor stations scattered throughout the outer system. "Compromised 3 weeks ago. You've been blind to most of our fleet movements because we've been feeding you false data." "Chancellor." Vexthara watched in horror as the symbols representing her government's military strength systematically disappeared from the display. "How is this possible?" "Your maintenance contractors include 17 different species," Lieutenant Hendricks explained from her position beside Captain Thane. 3 of them have significant human populations who were quite willing to help. U.S. in exchange for favorable trade agreements. Your security protocols assumed that only Veltherans would have access to critical systems. You've been sabotaging our defenses for months, Defense Minister Kothek said, his voice is barely above a whisper. "We've been preparing," Admiral Drakemore corrected. "The sabotage only activated when you refused our initial diplomatic overtures. Every virus, every infiltration program, every compromised system, they were all dormant until you forced us to use them." The display shifted to show the human fleet positions in even greater detail. What had looked like a tactical disadvantage was revealed as something far more sophisticated. A 3-dimensional web of overlapping fields of fire that covered every possible escape route. "Your fleet admiral is competent," Drakemore continued. Conversationally, Fleet Admiral Korthvanis has studied human tactics and correctly identified several potential weaknesses in our formation. Unfortunately for him, those weaknesses are intentional. We wanted him to concentrate his forces for an attack on what appeared to be our most vulnerable ships. New contacts appeared on the display, human vessels that had been hiding in the debris fields of the system's outer asteroid belt, their stealth systems finally disengaging. The trap was even more complete than the Veltherans had realized. "The mathematics are simple," Drakemore explained. "Your fleet has superior numbers and individual ship capabilities in several categories. Our fleet has superior positioning, intelligence, and tactical flexibility. In a straight fight, you might even win, though at catastrophic cost. She paused, letting that sink in before delivering the crucial point. But this wouldn't be a straight fight. This would be a coordinated strike on every piece of military infrastructure in your star system, followed by systematic destruction of your fleet while your ships are still trying to figure out why their sensors aren't working and they're defensive. Platforms aren't responding. Chancellor Vex Thara found her voice. You're threatening genocide. We're explaining the consequences of continued hostility, Captain Thane corrected from the surface. Your government chose to escalate to the level of targeting civilians. We're simply demonstrating that we can respond at that level if necessary. The holographic display zoomed in on the planet's surface, showing detailed scans of population, centers, industrial complexes, and government facilities. The level of detail was staggering. The humans had mapped every major installation on the planet. However, Admiral Drakemore continued, we have no interest in harming civilians. Our quarrel is with your government's decision to attack our colony, not with your people. Accept our terms, and this ends with reparations and new diplomatic agreements. Reject them, and it ends with your military capability reduced to nothing, and your government replaced by whoever emerges from the resulting chaos. You cannot simply overthrow legitimate governments, Interior Minister Yothmers protested. We're not overthrowing anything, Drakemore replied. We're offering you a choice between a negotiated settlement and the natural consequences of your actions. Your government declared war on the Terran Federation when you bombed our colony. We're here to end that war on terms that ensure it never happens again. The conference chamber fell silent except for the soft hum of the holographic projectors. Every Velfaran official was staring at the tactical display, seeing their entire defensive network compromised, their fleet surrounded, their planet mapped and analyzed down to the square kilometer. You've been planning this for months, Chancellor Vex Thara said finally. We've been planning this for years, Drakemore admitted. Not specifically targeting the Velfaran hegemony, but preparing for the inevitability that someone would attack human civilians and need to be taught why that was a mistake. Your government simply happened to be the first to provide us with justification. The display shifted one final time, showing the broader strategic picture. Human fleets were positioned throughout the galaxy, each one ready to respond to threats against human colonies and trade routes. The message was clear. The attack on Kepler 442b hadn't just provoked a local response. It had revealed the scope of human military preparation. 6 hours, Admiral Drakemore said. Give us your decision in 6 hours, or we'll make it for you. Fleet Admiral Korthvane stood in his flagship's tactical center, surrounded by holographic displays that told a story of complete military catastrophe. His chief tactical officer, Commander Jethrax, was running scenarios on the combat computers, each one ending in variations of total fleet annihilation. Sir, Jethrax reported, his voice tight with professional dread. I've run the engagement models 17 different ways. In the best-case scenario, we lose 73% of our ships before achieving any meaningful tactical objectives. In the worst case, he trailed off, unwilling to voice numbers that approached complete fleet destruction. Korthvane studied the human fleet positions with the eye of someone who had spent 4 decades learning the art of space warfare. The humans had achieved something he'd previously thought impossible: perfect tactical positioning against a numerically superior force. Every human ship was positioned to provide mutual support while maximizing their advantages and minimizing Velfaran's strengths. They're not just better prepared than we expected, he said finally. They're fighting a completely different kind of war. His communications officer looked up from her station. Sir, we're receiving battle status reports from all squadron commanders. Morale is problematic. The crews know what the sensor readings mean. Of course they did. Velfaran military training was excellent, which meant his officers could read tactical displays as well as he could. They understood that they were looking at a perfectly executed strategic trap, one that had been months in the making. "Fleet Admiral," came a new voice from the communication station. "Priority transmission from Chancellor Vex Thara." The main display shimmered and resolved into the image of the government complex's emergency command center. The Chancellor looked haggard, her normally immaculate appearance disheveled by hours of crisis management. "Admiral," she began without preamble, "what is your professional assessment of our military situation?" Korthvanes had served under 3 different chancellors, had fought in 7 major fleet engagements, had built his career on providing honest tactical assessments, regardless of political convenience. He wasn't about to start lying now. "We're outmaneuvered, outgunned, and outpositioned," he said bluntly. "The humans have achieved comprehensive intelligence superiority and tactical advantage. Any attempt at fleet engagement would result in catastrophic losses for minimal strategic gain." "Are you saying we cannot win?" "I'm saying we cannot fight," Korthvanes replied. "There's a difference. The humans have structured this engagement to make resistance both futile and unnecessary. They're offering terms that leave our government intact and our people alive. Rejecting those terms would serve no purpose except pride." Chancellor Vex Thara's image flickered as her communication was briefly interrupted by another system. Malfunction, more evidence of how thoroughly the humans had compromised Veltharan infrastructure. "The High Council is demanding military action," she said when the connection stabilized. "They believe surrender would invite attack from our other enemies." "The High Council is wrong," Korthvanes said, with the bluntness that had both advanced and limited his political career. "Our other enemies will see that we survived contact with human military forces through negotiation rather than destruction. That's a sign of strength, not weakness." Commander Jethrak stepped forward, his expression grim. "MAAM, if I may add a tactical perspective, the humans have demonstrated capabilities we didn't know existed. Electronic warfare systems that can penetrate our most secure networks, stealth technology that renders their ships nearly invisible until they choose to decloak, and atmospheric penetration capabilities that neutralize what we thought was an absolute defensive advantage. They're not just technologically superior in some areas," Korthvanes continued. "They're strategically sophisticated in ways we completely failed to anticipate. This operation required months of preparation, intelligence gathering, and coordination between multiple fleet elements. They've elevated asymmetric warfare to an art form." The Chancellor was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. "You're saying they're more dangerous than we thought." "I'm saying they're more competent than we thought," Korthvanes corrected. "Dangerous implies unpredictable aggression. What they've demonstrated is calculated, proportional response to an attack on their civilians. They could have opened fire immediately upon entering our space. Instead, they're offering negotiated settlement." "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving a direct transmission from the human fleet commander. Admiral Drakemore is requesting permission to speak with you personally." Korthvanes glanced at Chancellor Vex Thara's image, received a reluctant nod, then activated the communication channel. Admiral Drakemore appeared on a secondary display, her bridge visible behind her, functional, efficient, focused entirely on combat operations. "Fleet Admiral Korthvanes," she said with professional courtesy. "I wanted to speak with you directly, military professional to military professional." "Admiral Drakemore," he replied with equal formality. "I assume you want to discuss terms of fleet surrender." "I want to discuss terms of fleet preservation," she corrected. "Your ships represent the primary military asset of your government. Destroying them would serve no strategic purpose and would leave your space vulnerable to predation by less reasonable neighbors." Korthvanes found himself impressed despite the circumstances. The human admiral was offering him a way to maintain military honor while accepting political reality. "What are you proposing?" "Stand down your fleet for the duration of negotiations," Drakemore said. Allow our diplomatic teams to complete their work. Once agreements are finalized, both fleets withdraw to non-confrontational positions and resume normal patrol schedules. And if our government rejects your terms? Drakemore's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes suggested she hoped that wouldn't be necessary. Then we demonstrate why rejection would be unwise, and you'll be dealing with whoever takes power in the aftermath. Fleet Admiral Korthvanes looked around his tactical center, at the officers who had served under him for years, at the displays showing a fleet trap that military historians would study for generations. The choice was between preserving his ships and crews for future service to his people, or sacrificing them in a futile gesture that would accomplish nothing except guaranteeing that the humans would be less generous with whoever came after. Admiral Drakemore, he said formally, the Veltharan Deep Fleet acknowledges your tactical superiority and will comply with your request for fleet stand-down, pending resolution of diplomatic negotiations. It was the hardest sentence he'd ever spoken, and possibly the most important. 3 months later, Captain Kirian Thane stood in the memorial garden that had been constructed on the site of the former Kepler 442b colony. The crystalline monuments rose from carefully tended earth, each one bearing the name of a civilian killed in the Veltharan attack. 40,000 names, etched in materials that would endure for millennia. The reparations have been distributed to all registered family members, Lieutenant Hendricks reported, consulting her datapad as they walked between the memorial stones. The Veltharan government has exceeded the agreed-upon amounts in most cases. Chancellor Vexthara seems genuinely committed to making amends. Thane nodded, pausing before a monument dedicated to the colony's children. The youngest victim had been 3 years old, a little girl named Emma, whose only crime had been living in a place her killers considered strategically inconvenient. Any word from Admiral Drakemore about the sector patrol agreements? All signed and implemented, Hendricks confirmed. Veltharan space is now officially a safe harbor zone for human vessels. More importantly, they've established joint patrol protocols with our 7th Fleet. The cooperation has been surprisingly genuine. That was the most interesting development. Thane had expected grudging compliance, minimal cooperation designed to meet the letter of their agreements while violating the spirit. Instead, the Veltharans had embraced their new role as regional partners with something approaching enthusiasm. "Sir," came Sergeant Volkov's voice over the COM system. "We've got incoming traffic. Veltharan diplomatic vessel requesting permission to land." Thane checked his chronometer. "Right on schedule. Grant permission, Sergeant. And have honor guard form up. This is an official occasion." 20 minutes later, Chancellor Vexthara emerged from a sleek diplomatic shuttle, flanked by a small entourage that included Fleet Admiral Korthvanes and several officials Thane didn't recognize. The Chancellor had requested this meeting personally, traveling across half the sector to attend the memorial dedication. "Captain Thane," she said, offering the traditional Veltharan gesture of respect, a complex positioning of hands that indicated recognition of equal status. "Thank you for allowing us to participate in this ceremony." "Chancellor," Thane replied, returning the gesture with the precision that months of diplomatic protocol had taught him. "The memorial is for all who wish to remember. Your presence honors their memory." They walked together through the garden, the Veltharan delegation stopping frequently to read names and ages inscribed on the crystalline monuments. Thane watched Chancellor Vexthara's expression as she absorbed the human cost of her government's decision, not statistics or casualty reports, but individual names, individual lives cut short. "I have brought something," she said finally, producing a small crystalline device from her ceremonial robes. A memory crystal containing the personal testimony of every Veltharan officer involved in the attack on your colony. Their accounts of what they were told, what they believed, and what they now understand about the consequences of their actions. Thane accepted the crystal, feeling its surprising weight. This will be preserved with the other memorial records. Future generations of both our species will be able to learn from their words. That is my hope, Vexthara said quietly. We told ourselves many things to justify the attack. That humans were expanding too quickly, that your colonies represented a threat to Veltharan security, that decisive action would prevent future conflict. She paused before a monument bearing the names of an entire family. We never considered that the threat was not human expansion, but our own fear of it. Fleet Admiral Korthvani stepped forward, his formal uniform bearing new decorations that Thane didn't recognize. Captain, I wanted to personally thank you for the tactical consultation your fleet provided during the Krillian incursion last month. The joint patrol protocols you established proved invaluable. That had been an unexpected test of the new alliance. When the predatory Krillian Empire had launched raids into Veltharan territory, assuming that their recent defeat by humans had left them vulnerable, they'd discovered instead that human and Veltharan forces now operated in coordination. The raiders had been driven off with minimal casualties and a clear message that the sector was under joint protection. Your fleet adapted to combined operations remarkably quickly, Thane replied. Admiral Drakemore's report praised Veltharan tactical flexibility. We learned much from studying human operational methods, Korthvani admitted. Your approach to asymmetric warfare has influenced our entire strategic doctrine. We were too focused on traditional ship-to-ship engagement, too reliant on assumed advantages. You taught us to think systematically about intelligence gathering, strategic positioning, and long-term preparation. Chancellor Vexthara had been listening to this exchange with growing thoughtfulness. Captain, may I ask you something that has been troubling me? Of course. When your fleet arrived in our system, you could have simply destroyed our defensive capabilities and demanded unconditional surrender. Instead, you offered negotiated terms and preserved our military assets. Why? Thane considered the question carefully before answering, because the goal was never conquest or revenge. The goal was ensuring that attacks on human civilians carry consequences severe enough to deter future aggression. Dead governments can't learn from their mistakes or serve as examples to others. You wanted us to survive so we could warn others? We wanted you to survive so you could become partners, Thane corrected. The galaxy is full of species that solve problems through violence. What it needs is more species that solve problems through cooperation. The attack on our colony was a mistake born of fear and misunderstanding. Those can be corrected. Malice and genuine aggression would have required a different response. Chancellor Vexthara nodded slowly. The High Council spent weeks analyzing your tactical methods, trying to understand how you achieved such comprehensive victory. But the real lesson wasn't in your technology or strategy, was it? What do you think the real lesson was? That strength without wisdom leads to reckless decisions. That fear of others' capabilities leads to actions that create the very conflicts you're trying to prevent. That the measure of a civilization is not how effectively it can destroy its enemies, but how skillfully it can transform enemies into allies. Thane smiled, the first genuinely relaxed expression he'd shown since arriving in Veltharan space 3 months earlier. I think Admiral Drakemore would approve of that assessment. As if summoned by the mention of her name, Drakemore's voice crackled through the comm system. Captain Thane, we've received new orders from Terran Command. The Hegemony has formally requested human assistance in establishing the sector-wide peacekeeping initiative. Apparently, 6 other species have approached them about joining the joint patrol protocols. Thane exchanged glances with Chancellor Vexthara, seeing the same realization dawning in her expression. What had begun as a punitive expedition to address a single attack had evolved into something far more significant, a new model for interspecies cooperation based on mutual respect rather than mutual fear. Acknowledge the orders, Admiral, Thane replied, and informed Terran Command that the Veltharan Hegemony has proven itself a capable and trustworthy partner. I recommend full diplomatic recognition and expanded cooperation agreements. As the sun set over the memorial garden, casting long shadows between the crystalline monuments, Thane reflected on the strange mathematics of warfare and diplomacy. Sometimes the greatest victories came not from destroying enemies, but from helping them understand why they had become enemies in the first place. The names on the monuments would be remembered. The children who had died in the Veltharan attack would never be forgotten. But their deaths had not been in vain if they led to a future where such attacks became unthinkable, not because of fear, but because of understanding. Behind him, human. And Veltharan officers were already deep in discussion about patrol schedules, communication protocols, and joint training exercises. The alliance that had been forged in the crucible of crisis was growing stronger with each passing day. In the end, that was humanity's greatest weapon, not their atmospheric penetration technology or their tactical brilliance, but their ability to turn enemies into friends and fear into cooperation. It was a weapon that grew stronger with use, that created more security than it consumed, that built rather than destroyed. The memorial garden would stand as a reminder of the cost of conflict, but it would also stand as proof that even the worst mistakes could be the foundation for better choices, if both sides were willing to learn from them. As the Veltharan delegation prepared for their return journey, Chancellor Vexthara paused beside Thane one final time. "Captain, your people have given us something more valuable than victory or defeat. You've given us the chance to become worthy of the peace we now share." Thane watched the shuttle disappear into the alien sky, then turned back to the memorial. Stones. Tomorrow he would return to his ship and resume the work of keeping the peace they had all fought so hard to achieve. Tonight, he would remember the 40,000 names and the lesson they had taught two civilizations about the true price of understanding. The Blade-class ships had cut through Veltharan defenses like fire through silk. But in the end, it was human wisdom, not human weapons, that had won the war before it truly began.